In this video, I'll be going over the state of World of Warcraft Classic, what versions of it exist, how you can play them, and how popular they are. Since Classic released in 2019, it's fragmented into several different pathways, aiming to meet the demands of different groups of players. And whilst the most current expansion, that being WotLK Classic at the moment, is by far the most popular option, there may be a little more out there for the vanilla enjoyers than you would think at first glance. I'll also do a quick mention for Dragonflight towards the end, since it released not too long ago and thus far is appearing to have much more to it than just a honeymoon phase for many players. So let's start off with the big one, where in the Classic world the vast majority of players are WotLK Classic. Releasing late 2022, WotLK Classic is currently in its first content phase, that being Naxxramas 25 and 10-man, Eye of Eternity, the Obsidian Sanctum, and PvP Season 5. It has undergone some changes compared to the original game, such as having the looking for dungeon system removed, instead favouring an approach that players should look to connect with each other through the replacement looking for more interface instead. Also, Wintergrasp is no longer a server-specific event, but for all intents and purposes is a cross-realm battleground, and as we'll see in a moment, very few servers have any faction balance at the end game. So aside from some lag in 120 versus 120 combat, this is overall a positive thing, as otherwise there would be very little PvP in Wintergrasp for many servers. Also worth a mention that nowadays Blizzard are a lot more strict on not letting a server's population get out of hand. In the run up to Wrath, it was becoming more and more noticeable that players would keep transferring to only ever play on the server that had the largest population for their faction on their region. This was leading to some excessive queuing times and unstable server performance. Eventually Blizzard added a threshold where a server would become locked and players were unable to create new characters there or transfer to that location. On top of that, a while back a bunch of the dead realms, as in only a handful of players dead, were consolidated onto ones with healthier populations. But if you haven't been on the game in a while, your character might be playing on a different realm, and it might even have a forced name change on it too. In terms of where to play, a good reference point is the site ironforge.pro. Since Blizzard doesn't release player numbers, this is kind of what we have. It tracks player populations via the number of players on arena teams, as well as individual raiding characters showing as appearing in Warcraft logs. Of course, this means it can show duplicates if people have many alts, but again, this is kind of what we have, and I think it gives an overall good impression. As you can see here, though, faction balance across all regions isn't too bad on a server-by-server basis. You're more or less just picking Alliance or Horde nowadays. Keep in mind the top servers are almost certainly going to be locked. So for Europe, that'll be Gehennis and Firemore, and for North America, I believe Benediction and Fairlina. But for other servers, the status changes quite often, and ironforge.pro doesn't always reflect the actual state of which servers are locked. For example, on Europe, as I'm writing this video, only 2 of them are locked, not half a dozen. The good news is Wrath of the Lich King got off to a booming start, with tons of returning players from all points of the game to experience World of Warcraft's peak sub-count expansion. Ironforge.pro shows the number of characters in Wrath who are actively engaging at endgame as the largest number it's ever been, easily overtaking Classic's old record, which was the launch of Blackwing Lure, for several resets in a row now. It's since dropped off quite fast because, well, there's only so much Naxx you can take. Blizzard re-releasing Naxx nowadays didn't quite have the same appeal as it did back in the original vanilla, because a lot more people did Naxx 40 during Classic. It's also holiday season, people tend to go away, and there's been a very successful launch for Dragonflight, which we'll talk about later. Phase 2 for WotLK Classic is expected to drop in mid-January. The key feature will be a revamped and pre-nerf Ulduar, which is shaping up to be much more in tune with progression raiding than anything we've seen so far, including Tier 5 and Muru during the Sunwell if you did that. I have been testing this content on the PTR, and for our current gear, many hard mode fights are quite tightly tuned. It should be a lot of fun, and we should see many players returning for this. One final note for Wrath is that up to January 16th, there is a global 50% experience buff to all activities in the game. So if finishing off leveling was the thing putting you off getting back into it, well, it's never been faster than it is right now at the moment. Oh, and if you're behind on gear as well, I mean, Wrath is the expansion that really started to make catch-up gearing incredibly fast. There will even be 10-man tier 7 raiding gear dropping from Dungeons too. I did a video on it a little while ago if you wanted some more details on that. that. Right then, that's Wrath. Let's move back one expansion, TBC. Well, unfortunately, this is going to be quite a short section. Blizzard currently do not host any Burning Crusade Classic servers in any capacity. Whilst of course Outland exists on Wrath servers, they're mainly just for leveling. Nobody's going back there and making level 70 raids to do Black Temple again. It seems to me like the demand for this to exist just wasn't there as it was when we were going from Classic to TBC. So friendly reminder, if you like Wrath a lot, to make lots of noise for Wrath era servers when we're getting around the time of ICC. Also, Blizzard didn't rule out the possibility of TBC era, but for me, if it didn't happen as Wrath dropped, I just don't really see when it would. That's it for TBC. Let's go back one more time into Classic, as in Vanilla Classic, where it all began. Are people really wanting to play this version of World of Warcraft again over Wrath, TBC, or even retail? As it turns out, yes, they are. You think you do, and it turns out that some people actually do. So you may have heard of the seasonal Classic WoW server. It was launched back in November 2021. The idea behind it was to take vanilla servers and modify them in certain ways to offer a different experience. For Season of Mastery, some of the key changes included a faster content cadence, more experience from questing and elite quests, updated content release schedules, such as making ranking available straight away, as well as the tier 0.5 quest lines and Diamol all being available from day one. The biggest of all updates, however, was to raiding encounters, adding extra mechanics and health to the bosses to hopefully increase their depth a little bit more, and so they don't just all fall over in 1 minute. There was also a removal of world buffs from raiding instances. It got off to a very popular start, as fresh servers have a tendency to do, but ended up retaining a niche player base who wanted to see Classic all the way through once again. As of today, the servers are still up, but they will functionally close on February 14th, 2023. So all in all, there isn't really much point starting on the seasonal servers right now if you want to play Classic. The reason I'm going out of my way to mention them is to let you know that this is something that Blizzard has given a go in the past, and I personally think it's something that they will try to do again, just not for a little while longer. People are starting to get that Classic itch again, and as we will see with the era servers, the demand for a second seasonal server has been on the rise. But if we look back to the past, Season of Mastery released quite near the highly anticipated release of Phase 2 of TBC Classic with Serpent Shrine Cavern and Tempest Keep. And nowadays, one of the criticisms which more or less everybody lays on Season of Mastery was the timing when it came out, conflicting with the live version of Classic. And Ulduar is out soon, so I'm just saying, let's not do that again, shall we? If the servers close more or less in February, then we have some beta or PTR or whatever it is for the next season starting in March, you could expect an April, May, perhaps early summer release for the next seasonal server. That would be my guess anyway. I also think you can get away with launching around Trial of the Crusader as well, just because it's quite a short raid. As for what Season 2 may be, I couldn't really guess if I'm honest. Players want so many different varying things, and I think ideally you only want to be experimenting with one of those things at once to give it the best chance at seeing a solid player base. But the most popular demands are, in no particular order, a fresh No Changes 2019 release, aka World of Warcraft, a seasonal server with class changes and rebalancing, additional content added to the game, or some kind of notion of Classic Plus, or servers where players can take on the hardcore challenge. More on that in a moment. Either way, the demand is growing, people are driving hype, so watch the seasonal space if you're interested. Next for Classic is Classic Era. Classic Era servers were created when originally the game moved from Vanilla Classic into TBC. They are non-progressive realms frozen on Phase 6 content, meaning everything up to and including Naxxramas is out, and there is not going to be anything new released. The purpose of these servers was to create a place for Classic enjoyers to go back to as TBC came out, and you can find these servers on a drop-down on your Battle.net launcher on either the standard version of WoW or on the Classic ones. When Classic Era originally dropped, you could pay to have your character clone to exist on both the live version of the Classic game as well as Era. Unfortunately, this service was discontinued last summer, and it looks as though clones have been wiped from the game, so if you want to play Era nowadays, you're gonna have to start fresh, with no experience buffs on a fully progressed server, which sounds like a pretty tough sell for most people, right? Well, despite the adversity, people have been coming back to Era, and there's definitely been a buzz in the community to create content on these servers too, chief among which has been the hardcore challenge. The idea behind this has been something since WotLK Classic back in 2019, and the same community of players successfully led an initiative during the Season of Mastery to defeat Ragnaros with an entire raid group of players who had never died. And with Season of Mastery winding down, the interest is growing for this playstyle. Blizzard have shown it some interest in the past too, awarding special achievements for example. The basics of it are leveling a character to 60 solo without dying or trading. There are tons of additional rule sets you can follow for a greater challenge, such as being a fully self-sufficient character, only using gear you make, or restricting yourself to a certain spell school. There's also a special add-on that monitors activity to make sure there's no foul play, as well as announcing deaths in guild chat whenever they happen, which they do a lot. I think part of taking on the challenge and then immediately looking for loopholes though is kind of missing the point of what it's about in the first place. It's more of a for fun thing to do to give some life to classic servers and try and indicate to Blizzard what the player base would like. If this sounds interesting to you, the places to play are Bloodsail Buccaneers on North America and Hydraxian Waterlords on Europe. For regular play on Classic Era, servers have also been connected some time ago, as in now you will see people from your server's cluster instead of just your own. These are as follows, as you can see on screen here, across Europe and North America. This kind of had to happen to bolster the smaller player base at the time, and was an alternative solution to consolidating realms as they did on Wrath. As for where to play on Europe, the most active PvE servers are on the Pyrewood Village cluster, and for PvP, Firemore. For North America, I believe, you might want to check in the comments on this one, but the most active PvE cluster is Mancrik, and PvP is Whitemane. So that's Classic for you. Definitely a smaller player base, but a more tight-knit one, and one that's been gradually growing too. Finally, Dragonflight. More than just a honeymoon? Well, certainly seems that way as we currently are. Good content, solid story, wonderful open world. Dragon riding has been a big hit for me personally, and a lack of chorecraft is chalking Blizzard's latest expansion up to already being a hit in the minds of many. And I'm going to go on a bit of a side rant about this whole honeymoon phase thing and only enjoying things for a short amount of time. If you never did anything because you might not like it eventually, you would never do anything. If people have fun for a few weeks, good for them. Can we just stop with the whole you'll be miserable eventually kind of thing? You never had a new takeout place or a TV series or a band that you obsess over, but then you get bored of it after a while? Do you regret going to that place, listening to them or whatever it may be because you didn't like it as much 1 month later? People are out there being mad because they see somebody else liking something and can't understand why. It's just not a great mindset. Anyways, rant on cooldown, let's get back to it. Blizzard also released a content roadmap for the latest expansion. Is this the first time they've released so much information about what's planned for the future? I can't think of one from the past, if I'm honest. This is outlining roughly what their plans are for 10.1 and 10.2, including heirloom grey and white items. That's going to open up a lot more low fantasy transmogs, I bet. Orc and human heritage armor, UI improvements, profession updates, a mega dungeon, and your standard new zone, raid, and PvP seasons. All subject to timing, changes, feedback, of course, but hey, there it is, some form of commitment to the next entire year of retail World of Warcraft. When does that ever happen? Let's just hope Blizzard are able to deliver on this pretty content-heavy schedule. Player impressions of Dragonflight compared to Shadowlands or BFA so far though have been much improved. A lot more freedom in terms of you telling the game what to do instead of the other way around. Much more class-wide customization in terms of the updated talent trees, professions allowing your character to feel specialized into a niche rather than get to X level for Y bonus and then ignore it, and leveling alts as well as the alt experience in Dragonflight is so much more friendly than it's been for years, so it's a lot of fun. As always, we'll see how it continues going, but it looks to be positive. As for me personally, I expect to play Dragonflight casually as the major content patches drop. I'll be putting most of my time into Ulduar and Wrath Classic on my two characters, which is my Warlock main and my Hunter alt. I am very interested in seasonal World of Warcraft servers making a return, and I want to see what Blizzard decide to do with them. I'm more on the do loads of changes stuff side of the fence, but I think it's very important they get the timing right, and coinciding with the release of Ulduar just isn't the time to be doing it. Classic era and the hardcore challenge is very appealing to me too. I've always been a fan of leveling in Classic. I did 10 characters to 60 during Vanilla Classic. The only problem is I know all too well how long that journey takes, so it's kind of just a maybe for me at this point in time. Oh, and finally, if you were maybe thinking, but what about after Wrath? Well, we don't have any news yet, and we won't have for some time, I expect. I think it will be Cataclysm, and I imagine I'll be making videos and talking about that a lot more as we get closer to it being a possibility. But that is all from me today. That's Classic and a little on retail in a nutshell heading into 2023. Let me know which version of World of Warcraft you're on and what is interesting you most for the future. And if you like the content, drop a like, it helps me out. As always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in. I'll see you all in the next one very soon.